Hello and welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Norman Finkelstein, a strong critic of Israel and American foreign policy in the Middle East, is again in the news. A documentary on his life titled American Radical has recently premiered, and he has a new book out. This time, We Went Too Far: Truth in Consequences of the Gaza Invasion. And, as ever, controversy surrounds him. So, surprise, surprise, a program on Norman Finkelstein. We have Norman Finkelstein. Norman, thanks for being with us again. We also have Dr. Gissin in Tel Aviv. He's a political analyst and former advisor to Ariel Sharon. And I also thank you for being with us on the program. And another member of our Crosstalk team, Elena Hanga. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. Norman, you're in the news again. There's a documentary about you, and you have a new book out. Have you seen the documentary about yourself, American Radical?
No, I've not seen it yet, but people tell me it's an accurate depiction of me.
Well,
for better or for worse.
For better or worse, I have also seen it. I want to go to your book a little bit later. If I go to Dr. Gissin, do you have any intention of seeing this documentary on Norman?
Well, yes, if I haven't had a chance to see it, but I would see it just to get more informed about Dr. Finkelstein, yeah?
So how would you describe Dr. Finkelstein? I'm sure you're aware of him and his work, his past books, many of them, very strong critic of Israel. Is that why you would see the film?
No, I'm telling you, you know, one of the reasons that we survived through so many decades and centuries is because we had diversity of thought. I'm very tolerant to diversity of thought I would say, in Jewish thinking, in Israeli thinking, except when you cross certain red lines which put at jeopardy the very existence of your own people.
Okay, Norman, what do you think those red lines are?
Well, I'm not sure if it's true to say that Israel at least tolerates much diversity of thought nowadays. As we speak, there is a witch hunt going on in Israel against those who dissented from Israel's massacre in Gaza during December and January of this past year. And if you look at, for example, the recent findings of Freedom House, it's now demoted Israel to only a partly free society in terms of freedom of speech. And Israel, according to Reporters Without Borders, now ranks only number 93 among the world's 180 nations in terms of freedom of speech. And in fact, I think many of your listeners will be surprised to learn that in the Middle East, Lebanon, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait are now ranked higher in terms of freedom of speech than Israel.
Okay, Dr. Gissin, I mean, Freedom House is considered by most people kind of a right-wing operation. I mean, they tend to support people like Israel. How do you respond to that?
Now, there are a lot of organizations which have a different axe to grind. I mean, the test is the test of result. You come to Israel, you visit Israel, you see the number of political parties, you see Arabs who have freedom of speech more than they have in their own respective country. Come on, all these mumbo-jumbo coming from the 60s, you know, all this, do not apply to Israel today. You know what? I will tell you something about Israel. Israel is not a normal state. You know what Israel is? They declare that this year will be the year of the endangered species. Among the human race, Israel is an endangered species, and therefore Israel is a national park. It's a national park for endangered species, and therefore it acts according to the threats that it receives. That's all. But inside the national park, inside the borders of Israel, you come and visit. You see the kind of freedom of speech we have. You see even the war, the so-called massacre that he calls in Gaza, which wasn't a massacre. This was purely the act of self-defense, according to Article 51. Other countries are not brought to court for that. Israel was, for various reasons, which I don't want to go into it right now. But we have a right to survive. We have a right to defend ourselves. We wouldn't have been here at this stage, you know, after 61 years of a state, if we weren't capable of defending ourselves and defending our values when we defend ourselves.
Norman, would you like to reply to that? Endangered species.
Well, I'll agree with one thing Mr. Gissin had to say. I think we can all agree that Israel is not a normal state, but I'm not sure if that's something you would want to take pride in. The fact of the matter is that each day when you open the newspapers, Israel is gearing up for a war against another country, another innocent, often defenseless people. This past week they talked about a second attack, or Operation Cast Lead 2, against Gaza. Then they talk about attacking Lebanon. Then they talk about attacking Iran. I think it is correct to say that in the modern world, in the contemporary world, there is really no state quite like Israel. Israel is off the cliff. It's become a lunatic state.
Dr. Gissin, Norman Finkelstein has been banned from Israel for 10 years. Do you think... I'd like to, this program is about Norman, so I'd like to ask a few questions about him. He's been banned for Israel for 10 years.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair? Is he a security threat to Israel?
No, I'm listening... I'm listening to him, and I hear the words coming out like they're coming out of their hate websites that are sponsored by Iran today. There are about 7,000 of them. It's the same thing. It's the same type of propaganda. I mean, that has nothing to do with reality. I mean, he say that we're not a normal state, not because we don't want to be a normal state. We're a normal people living in an abnormal region.
Wait, no, you
That's
said
what it
that.
is. It's not an hospitable region. When my great-parents, came from Russia in 150 years ago, they came because there was a Bible in one hand. My great-grandfather from Dnieper-Petrovsk came with a Bible in one hand and a rifle in another, and his hand was extended to the Arabs who lived here. Some did make business with him. Others who fought him had to meet the wrath of his rifle. And that's how you live in the Middle East. We are a people who want to survive. We succeeded in surviving because we were able to defend ourselves, to stand up throughout the centuries.
Go ahead,
Without
Norman.
that, we wouldn't have been there. That's why we are an endangered species.
All right, let's go to Norman here. Go ahead.
It is an oddity that you say you're coming and you want to live in peace with somebody. You come with a rifle in your hand. I often have friends visit me at my home, and when they come to my home, they don't come with a rifle. So did the first settlers in the United States of America. You have to ask yourself an obvious question.
So did the first settlers.
Dr. Gissin, Dr. Gissin, please Dr. Gissin, please let Norman finish his point. Go ahead, Norman, finish your point, please.
I appreciate Dr. Gissin's comparison, because I think it's exactly right. The first Euro-Americans who came to North America came with a rifle in hand because they came with the intention of displacing and dispossessing the indigenous population. That's why they needed a rifle. Yeah. And most Americans nowadays at least acknowledge the fact that what was done to the indigenous population of North America was wrong. And it's exactly for the same reason that Israel, or I should say Jews from Eastern Europe, had to come to Israel or Palestine with a rifle in hand, because their intention was not to live with the indigenous population, but to displace and dispossess it in order to create a Jewish state in an area which was overwhelmingly Arab. And I think pretty much everything that ensued after that followed from that basic fact. Nowadays, I would say there are possibilities for Israel to live at peace with what was or what remains of the indigenous population. But unfortunately, Israel is unwilling to resolve the conflict along the lines of international law, which would allow for some sort of coexistence between Israel and the population that was displaced and dispossessed.
Okay, let's go back to Tel Aviv. Does Israel want to have peace with its neighbors, and can the Palestinians have their own state as well?
Yeah,
I mean, consistently, the United States and Israel are the only two countries in the world.
They can.
They're the only two countries in the world that block this consistently at the United Nations. So does Israel want to have peace? Go ahead, Dr. Gissin.
But Dr. Finkelstein, Dr. Finkelstein's formula is an ensured formula for committing suicide, not for living in the Middle East. You have to live with the realities in the Middle East. I would like the Middle East to be like North America. I would like the Middle East to be after 400 years of bloody wars like Europe, but it's not. It's still a young region. It's fraught with conflict. The Arab-Israeli conflict is not the only one. There are more conflicts than states in the Middle East. There are 22 states with one Israel, and there are over 30 ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. Let's face it, the largest conflicts here are between Shiite and Sunnis, not between Israel and its Arab neighbors. And Israel came with good intentions. Israel came with the intention to live alongside the Palestinians. And let me say, the way, when my great-grandfather came from Russia, you know what he said? He had it very right. And he had the Bible as his guide. He said, the rights of the land are ours because this is our land. This is why I came back, because this is our ancestral homeland. People who live on the land have rights.
Dr. Gissin,
and we try to live with those people.
Dr. Gissin, please, we're going to the break. Norman, would you like to have a quick word before we go to the break?
Yes, I wonder, Dr. Gissin, if I came with a Bible in hand to your home, I knocked on your door, and I said, according to my Bible, my family lived where your home is. My family lived there 2,000 years ago. Would you pack up your bags and leave?
All right, gentlemen, that's a very interesting point.
3,000.
Gentlemen, we're going to go to a break, and when we return, we will continue our discussion on the Middle East and many other issues. Stay with our team.
I asked myself why I left the house. I couldn't go home.
It's a miracle she's still alive. Because all other Serbs in our municipality who dare to stay are or kidnapped and missing or dead.
I sometimes risk it and go on the street. My wife knows that if I don't come back, I'm dead. Do you know who lives here?
I had to go shoot a 10-year-old boy over there.
We train them how to kill. We as officers develop the orders for them to kill. But we never explain to them why it's okay. Most people at the point of looking down and time to pull the trigger became conscientious objectors.
I don't remember squeezing the trigger, and I don't remember seeing him go down. All I remember is that we shot at him.
People on the other side are soldiers too, and soldiers do what soldiers do, and they're trying to kill us, we're trying to kill them, and that's just the ugly face of war.
See that enemy dressed in black! See that enemy dressed in black! Got my bayonet in his back! Got my bayonet in his back!
There's nothing honorable in killing. I went to the war zone and I started seeing how I need to change. And the only way to do that is to not pick up a rifle and kill another person. That's why I'm applying for conscience objector.
Blood flying all around! Blood flying all around! Keep your hands up to the ground! Keep your hands up to the ground!
Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Norman Finkelstein's criticism of Israel. Before, let's see who Russians tend to blame for Middle East tensions.
Russia's official position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is quite clear. It wants to play a role in a just peace. This week, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Moscow, holding meetings with President Dmitry Medvedev and Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, respectively. The parties discussed how Russia could facilitate deeper diplomatic ties between Israel and the Palestinians. The Levada Center survey reveals public opinion largely corresponds with Russia's inclusive approach to resolving the Middle East conflict. When asked who was responsible for instability in the Middle East, 26% of respondents said it was the United States. 12% said Israel was at fault, and 10% blamed Islamic fundamentalists. The survey also asked Russians which side they support in the conflict. Preferences here were more divided. 10% seconded the Israelis, 12% the Palestinians.